On September 1st, 1951, Chupari, Korea, around 3:47 a.m., one Hawaiian soldier had his 13 enemy soldiers dead. 2 of them were beaten to death with a shovel. His machine gun barrel was bent from firing so many rounds. Physically bent, the metal had warped from the heat of continuous fire, thousands of rounds ripping through the darkness until the laws of physics finally said, enough. But that's not the remarkable part. The remarkable part is what he chose to do when the barrel bent, when the ammunition ran out, when every option disappeared except one: surrender or fight with a shovel. Private First Class Anthony T. Kaho'ohanohano chose the shovel, and because of that choice, his entire squad lived. 6 months earlier, Tony Kaho'ohanohano was swimming in the Pacific Ocean off Maui, the island where he had spent 21 years of his life. He was tall, over 6 feet, with a basketball player's build and a quiet demeanor that made people underestimate him. Big mistake. Tony was the protective older brother in a family of 9 children. His father was a police officer who believed in duty, honor, and service. His mother devoted herself to keeping the chaos of 9 kids from burning the house down. Tony learned early that he had a responsibility to others. That being strong meant protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. He loved 3 things: his family, basketball, and the ocean. Maui was paradise, but in 1951, paradise was technically a territory, not a state. Hawaii wouldn't officially join the United States until 1959. Tony Kaho'ohanohano was fighting for a country that hadn't even fully claimed his home yet. But here's what you need to understand about the Kaho'ohanohano family. Service wasn't optional. It was an identity. Tony's father served, and all 6 Kaho'ohanohano brothers, every single one, joined the military. 1 would go to the Marines, 1 to the National Guard, 4, including Tony, to the active duty Army. Decades later, another family member would serve in Afghanistan. Service defined them. Sacrifice defined them. Tony was about to prove just how far that definition could stretch. September 1st, 1951. Central Korea, the village of Chupari. If you've never heard of Chupari, you're not alone. It's a tiny spot on the map in the mountainous interior of Korea, surrounded by ridges with designations that sound more like grid coordinates than places. Hill 851, Hill 931, Hill 894. But in the late summer of 1951, this anonymous terrain was soaked in blood. Tony was assigned to Company H, 2nd Battalion, 17th Infantry Regiment, 7th Infantry Division. He was in charge of a machine gun squad, the heavy firepower that could make the difference between holding a position and getting overrun. That night, his squad was attached to Company F's defensive position near Hill 851, providing support for infantry dug into the Korean mountainside. The Korean War had reached a brutal stalemate. Peace talks were happening. At Kaesong, diplomats in suits arguing over maps while soldiers died over hills. Just weeks earlier, the Battle of Bloody Ridge had ended. The 2nd Infantry Division lost 167 men, taking a ridge they eventually abandoned later. In less than 2 weeks, the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge would begin, killing another 397 Americans. September 1951 was one of the bloodiest months of the entire war, and Tony's unit was right in the middle of it. The 7th Infantry Division had been fighting near Chupari since late August, trying to straighten their defensive lines. In the first 2 days of September alone, September 1st and 2nd, 61 American soldiers would be killed in this sector, repelling a massive North Korean counterattack on Hill 851. Tony would be one of them. Picture the scene, 3 a.m., September 1st, pre-dawn darkness in the Korean mountains. It's cold, not winter cold yet, but enough that your breath steams and your fingers go numb on metal. Tony and his machine gun squad are in their fighting positions, sandbagged emplacements dug into the hillside, with fields of fire covering the approaches. They can't see much, just shadows, the vague outline of ridges against a slightly less dark sky. Every soldier is listening. In night combat, You hear the attack before you see it, the scrape of equipment, whispered commands in a foreign language, the distinctive sound of rifles being charged. Tony's machine gun is ready, belt-fed, heavy, mounted on a tripod for stability. This isn't a weapon you spray from the hip in movies, it's a precision instrument capable of delivering devastating firepower at specific points. Tony knows exactly where to aim when the enemy comes. He's not scared. Or maybe he is, but fear has become background noise after months in combat. What he feels is alert, ready, responsible. His squad depends on him. Company F depends on him. The defensive line depends on him. Tony is in charge of the machine guns that night. He has no idea that in 4 hours he'll be fighting with a shovel, or that 60 years later a president of the United States will stand in the White House and tell his story saying he was one American soldier, alone, against an approaching army, or that his nephew George, who wasn't even 2 years old yet, would spend decades fighting to get Tony the recognition he deserved, or that his sacrifice would inspire generations of soldiers who'd never even heard his name. All Tony knows is this: it's 3 a.m. on September 1st, 1951. His position is solid, his machine gun is ready, his squad is counting on him, and somewhere out there in the darkness, an entire North Korean force is getting closer to attack. The first sound was not gunfire, it's a whistle, high-pitched, piercing through the mountain air at 3 a.m. Every American soldier on Hill 851 knows exactly what that whistle means. Attack, now. Then the night explodes. North Korean forces hit Company F's defensive position like a tidal wave. Not dozens of soldiers, hundreds, a numerically superior force. That's what the official citation will say later, which is military speak for, "Holy hell, we're outnumbered." Tony Kaho'ohanohano is behind his machine gun when the world goes insane. Muzzle flashes strobe in the darkness like demonic lightning. Impossible to count, impossible to track. The enemy is everywhere and nowhere, shadows moving through shadows. Grenades detonate with sharp cracks that echo off the ridges. Tracers arc through the air, red streaks of death looking almost beautiful if you forget they're trying to kill you. Tony doesn't panic. He does what he's been trained to do. Controlled bursts, 3 to 5 rounds. Traverse, adjust, fire again. The machine gun roars, spitting brass casings that clink against rocks. He's aiming at muzzle flashes, at movement, at the spaces where his training tells him soldiers should be. The barrel heats up fast, glowing faint red in the darkness. He can feel the heat radiating even through his gloves. Around him, the defensive position is chaotic. American soldiers firing rifles, throwing grenades, screaming orders that get lost in the noise. Someone's hit. The scream has a different quality, higher, more desperate. Artillery starts landing somewhere to the left, earth fountaining skyward, the concussion wave hitting like a physical punch. The North Koreans keep coming. Tony fires, reloads, fires. The belt feeds through the gun, ammunition disappearing at a terrifying rate. He's killing enemy soldiers. He can see them falling. But for every one that drops, 3 more take his place. They're not retreating. They're not slowing down. They're going to overrun. The position. Somewhere behind Tony, an officer is making the hardest decision any commander can make. The math is brutal and simple. Stay here, everybody dies. Fall back, maybe some survive. The order came down the line, shouted from foxhole to foxhole, limited withdrawal, pull back to secondary positions. Let me translate that military jargon for you. Run. Company F is being overrun. The defensive line is collapsing. Soldiers grab their rifles, their ammunition, whatever they can carry, and they move. Not a rout. These are professional soldiers, but a fighting withdrawal, firing as they go, trying to establish a new defensive line before the enemy can exploit the gap. Tony hears the order. He looks at his squad. Young men, some barely old enough to shave, all of them looking at him for guidance. He's in charge, his decision. And Tony Kaho'ohanohano makes the call that will define his life and death. Fall back, he tells them. Get to better positions. Provide cover for the company. His squad doesn't want to leave him. You can see it in their faces, even in the darkness, even with bullets cracking overhead. But orders are orders. They move, scrambling back toward the secondary defensive line. Tony stays behind. Cover fire. 2 words. They sound so simple, so routine. Fire some rounds while the team relocates, then follow them. Standard infantry tactics. Except Tony isn't following them. He's staying. One American soldier, alone, facing an approaching army. The first thing you notice when everyone else leaves is the silence. Not actual silence, because the battle is still raging, but the absence of friendly voices. No more American accents shouting coordinates. No more reassuring presence of other soldiers to your left and right. Just you, your machine gun, and the enemy. Tony can hear them now, speaking Korean, getting closer. He can see their silhouettes moving through the darkness, emboldened by the American withdrawal. They think they've won. They think the position is abandoned. Tony proves them wrong. The machine gun opens up again, raking the approaching North Koreans with devastating fire. They scatter, diving for cover, stunned that someone's still fighting. Tony traverses the gun, methodical, professional, killing with precision. This isn't rage, this is craft. But the machine gun is getting dangerously hot. The barrel is glowing bright red now, visible even in darkness. Ammunition is running low. He can feel the belt getting shorter and can hear the changed rhythm of the feed mechanism, and then pain, white-hot searing, radiating from his left shoulder. Bullet or shrapnel, doesn't matter which, has punched through his uniform, through skin and muscle. Blood blooms hot and sticky, soaking his shirt. The impact spins him slightly, breaks his rhythm for just a second. He grabs his shoulder with his right hand, comes away wet with blood. For a moment, just a moment, Tony Kaho'ohanohano considers the reality of his situation. He's wounded, bleeding, alone. The enemy is closing in. His ammunition is running out. Every tactical manual ever written says the same thing: fall back, survive to fight another day. No shame in withdrawal when you're wounded and outnumbered. He could do it, should do it. The secondary defensive line is maybe 80 yards behind him. He could make it. His squad is there. Safety is there. Medical treatment is there. Life is there. Tony doesn't fall back. Instead, he does something that will baffle military historians when they study the action reports later. Something that makes sense only if you understand that some men have a different equation for what their life is worth. He gathers grenades, scavenges ammunition from a nearby position, stuffs his pockets and his vest with every round, every explosive he can carry. Then, and this is the part that defines heroism versus survival, he returns to his original position, not the safer fallback position, not the covered secondary emplacement, his original position, the most exposed spot on the entire defensive line, the place where the North Koreans are concentrating their attack. Why? The official Medal of Honor citation uses 8 words: to face the enemy alone. But there's more to it than that. Tony knows something that his squad doesn't know, that the officers ordering the withdrawal don't fully understand. If someone doesn't hold this position, if someone doesn't stop the North Korean advance right here, right now, the entire company might get overrun during the withdrawal. His squad needs time. Company F needs time. Americans are relocating in the darkness, establishing new positions, and they're vulnerable while they move. Tony is buying them that time with his blood. He settles back behind his machine gun, shoulder screaming in pain. Blood is running down his arm now, dripping off his fingers. The North Koreans are close. He can see individual faces in the muzzle flashes, contorted with rage and fear and determination. They're coming for him. Tony Kaho'ohanohano, 21 years old, from Maui, Hawaii, takes a breath, ignored the pain, grips the machine gun with bloody hands, and opens fire. For the next 2 hours, Tony Kaho'ohanohano fought like a man possessed. The machine gun barked and roared, spitting death into the darkness. When the barrel got too hot, he let it cool for precious seconds, using that time to throw grenades. When grenades ran out, he fired again. When one belt of ammunition was exhausted, he loaded another. The North Koreans concentrated their entire assault on his position, recognizing it as the key to breaking through. They threw everything they had at him: rifle fire, grenades, even mortars. The emplacement around Tony disintegrated under the onslaught. Sandbags ripped apart. Earth churned to moonscape. Tony kept firing. His shoulder wound bled continuously. Exhaustion crept in, making his arms heavy, his vision blurry. The machine gun barrel began to glow so hot it started to warp, the metal literally bending from the heat and continuous fire. But you can't fight forever when you're bleeding and alone. Eventually, the ammunition runs out. Let me tell you what deadly accurate machine gun fire looks like. It's not what you see in movies. Wild spraying, bullets flying everywhere, pure chaos. Real machine gun work is mathematics. Angles, timing, precision. Tony Kaho'ohanohano had been trained on the M1919 Browning machine gun, a weapon that could fire 400 to 600 rounds per minute. But the key wasn't how fast you could shoot. It was how well you could shoot. Controlled bursts, 3 to 5 rounds, traverse smoothly, adjust for distance and wind, fire again. Tony had mastered it. Through the pre-dawn darkness, his machine gun spoke with mechanical authority. Enemy soldiers advancing up the hill didn't just fall, they were cut down in waves, entire groups dropping simultaneously as Tony walked his fire across their formation. This wasn't luck, this was a skill. A North Korean soldier would expose himself for just a second, and that second was enough. Tony would catch the movement, adjust, and fire. The soldier would crumple. Another would try to advance using a different route. Same result. They were trying to use standard infantry tactics, fire and maneuver, one group covering while another advanced. But Tony was faster than their tactics, smarter than their plan. He was killing them faster than they could adapt. Between machine gun bursts, he threw grenades. Not wild tosses, but precise throws. Arc them over that rock, drop one in that depression where 3 soldiers are hiding, lob one at that muzzle flash. Each grenade a small apocalypse, dirt and shrapnel and screaming. One ammunition belt. Empty, reload, another belt. Empty, reload, another belt. How many is that? He's lost count. Doesn't matter. Keep firing. The machine gun is no longer just hot. It's radiating heat, like a furnace. Tony can feel it on his face, even from behind the gun. The metal is scorching, the kind of heat that would blister bare skin instantly. But Tony keeps his gloved hands on the weapon, keeps feeding belts, keeps firing. The barrel is glowing now, actually glowing, visible even in darkness, a dull red throb that pulses brighter with each burst of fire. And then something happens that shouldn't be possible. The barrel begins to bend. Let me explain the physics of this because it sounds impossible, but it's documented. It happened. A machine gun barrel is solid steel, built to withstand enormous heat and pressure. But steel has limits. When you fire thousands of rounds through a barrel without stopping, when the metal temperature reaches 800, 900, 1000 degrees Fahrenheit, the molecular structure begins to change. The steel expands, softens, loses rigidity. Tony has been firing almost continuously for nearly 2 hours. The barrel has never had time to properly cool. It's been subjected to heat and pressure that exceeds its design specifications. The metal is literally glowing cherry red, and it starts to warp. Not dramatically, not like a cartoon, just a slight curve, a deviation from truth that gets worse with each burst. The front sight is no longer perfectly aligned. The barrel droops slightly downward and to the left. Any reasonable person would stop firing at this point. The weapon is failing. It could explode. It could cause a catastrophic malfunction that would kill the shooter. Tony keeps firing. He compensates for the bent barrel, adjusting his aim by instinct and experience. The gun is still putting rounds downrange. It's still killing enemy soldiers. That's all that matters. North Korean soldiers are still falling, still dying, still unable to break through his position, still afraid of the one American who won't stop, won't die, won't let them pass. Then the ammunition runs out, not running low, not getting concerned. Out, completely out. Tony feels the belt feed through, hears the mechanism cycle, and then nothing. The gun goes silent. He checks. Maybe there's a jam. Maybe there's a malfunction. No, the ammunition box is empty. Okay, grenades. He reaches for his vest, for the grenades he scavenged earlier. Throw 1, 2, 3. Then watch them detonate among the advancing enemy. 4, 5. He reaches for another. His hand closes on empty fabric. No more grenades. Pistol. Every soldier carries a sidearm. Tony pulls his .45 caliber M1911, the same pistol that's been standard issue since World War I. 7 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, 8 chances. He fires at the closest North Korean soldier. The .45 barks heavy and loud. The soldier drops. 7 rounds left. Another soldier. 6 rounds. Another. 5. Mathematics was impossible now. There are dozens of enemy soldiers closing in. Tony has 5 bullets. 4, 3, 2, 1. The slide locks back. Empty. Tony ejects the magazine, reaches for another on his belt. His hand finds an empty pouch. He checks the other pouches. Empty, empty, empty. He's out of bullets, out of grenades, out of ammunition. The North Korean soldiers are 20 yards away. He can see them. Clearly now, pre-dawn light is beginning to illuminate the battlefield. Gray light, enough to see faces, to see the determination in their eyes as they realize the American machine gun has finally gone silent. 15 yards away. They're moving faster now, sensing victory. 10 yards. They can see Tony clearly now, a single soldier, wounded, bleeding, alone in a destroyed emplacement. They know there are no reinforcements coming. They know he has no ammunition left. They're about to overrun his position. Tony Kaho'ohanohano reaches down beside him and picks up his entrenching tool. The entrenching tool, every soldier carries one. It's technically for digging, foxholes, latrines, defensive positions. A folding spade, about 16 inches long when extended, weighing roughly 2 pounds. Steel head, wooden or metal handle. Standard issue. Unremarkable until you sharpen it. Soldiers had been using entrenching tools as weapons since World War I, when trench warfare made rifles too long and clumsy for close quarters fighting. In those narrow trenches, men fought with shovels, clubs, knives, anything that worked in tight spaces. The Germans called it trench clearing. The Allies called it necessity. By World War II, it was common practice to sharpen the edges of your entrenching tool, just in case. During the Battle of Stalingrad, German and Soviet soldiers engaged in brutal, hand-to-hand combat with shovels in the ruins of the city. The edge of a sharpened entrenching tool could cut through flesh and bone like an axe. Tony's entrenching tool has been sharpened. The edges are keen, the steel heavy and solid. It's all he has left. The first North Korean soldier crests the emplacement, rifle raised. Tony swings. There's no glory in what happens next, no honor in the Hollywood sense, just brutal, intimate violence. The entrenching tool is basically a battle axe, a heavy blade on a handle, swung with full body force. The physics are simple. Mass times velocity equals momentum. 2 pounds of steel swung with desperate strength, concentrated on a sharp edge. The first soldier goes down. The details don't matter. He goes down. Second soldier, climbing over the sandbags. Tony pivots, swings again. The shovel is slick with blood now, harder to grip. His shoulder wound has opened wider from the exertion, blood soaking through his entire left side. Third soldier, swing, connect. The impact jars through Tony's arms, through his wounded shoulder. Pain flares white hot. Fourth soldier, he's getting slower. Each swing takes more effort. His arms feel like lead. His vision is blurring. Blood loss, exhaustion, shock. Fifth soldier. This one gets close enough that Tony can see his eyes, wide with fear and fury. The shovel catches him. Sixth, seventh, how many now? Tony's lost count. Everything is instinct, muscle memory, survival reflex. Swing, block, swing. There's no thought anymore, no strategy, just action and reaction. The shoulder wound is bleeding badly now. Tony can feel weakness creeping through his limbs, that floating sensation that comes before you pass out. His swings are getting weaker, slower, but he doesn't stop. We don't know the exact moment Tony died. The records don't specify. There's no timestamp, no witness statement describing the final seconds. What we have is the aftermath. What we know is this: he fought until he was killed, not until he surrendered, not until he passed out, until he was killed. What we know is this: when American forces counterattacked and retook the position later that morning, they found Tony's body at his machine gun emplacement. What we know is this: 2 North Korean soldiers were found dead inside the emplacement itself. Inside, not outside, not approaching, inside, where Tony had fought his last stand, beaten to death with an entrenching shovel. 11 more enemy soldiers lay dead in front of the position, in a rough semicircle around the emplacement, shot, blown up by grenades, killed by machine gun fire. Total 13 enemy soldiers, 13 men who died trying to overrun one American's position, 13 men who failed. Something happened in those pre-dawn hours of September 1st that transcended tactics and strategy. Tony's squad, the men he'd ordered to fall back, the men who'd reluctantly left him behind, heard the continuous machine gun fire. They heard the grenades. They heard one man fighting an army, and they stopped retreating. Military doctrine talks about inspiration as an abstract concept, but this was concrete. This was watching someone refuse to quit, refuse to surrender, refuse to accept death until he'd done everything possible to save his brothers. The squad rallied. Other soldiers joined them. Officers saw what was happening and made the call: counterattack. American forces charged back toward the position, firing as they came. The North Korean assault, which had been on the verge of breakthrough, suddenly faced a renewed enemy. Soldiers who had been retreating were now attacking with fury. The North Koreans broke. The assault was completely repulsed. The defensive line held. Company F survived. The entire sector held because one Hawaiian soldier decided that his life was worth trading for theirs. When they found Tony's body, they found something else: the machine gun barrel, bent from continuous fire, physical proof of the impossible, sustained barrage he'd delivered, the empty ammunition containers, evidence of the volume of fire he'd maintained, the entrenching tool, blood-stained, dented from impact, lying near his body, and 13 dead enemy soldiers, testimony to a sacrifice so complete, so total, so far beyond the call of duty that it would take 60 years to properly honor it, 60 years to understand what Hill 851 saw that night, 60 years before a president would stand in the White House and say his name. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. On September 1st, 1951, Private First Class Anthony T. Kaho'ohanohano, service number RA290400479, was declared killed in action near Chupari, Korea. He was 21 years old. The Army did what the Army does. They processed the paperwork, they notified the family, they wrote up the action report documenting what happened on Hill 851, and they recommended Tony for the Distinguished Service Cross. The Distinguished Service Cross. Let me explain what that means, because most people don't understand the hierarchy of military decorations. The Medal of Honor is first, the highest recognition for valor that America can bestow. Then comes the Distinguished Service Cross. Second place, still an extraordinary honor. Men have had entire military careers and never received anything close to a DSC. It recognizes extraordinary heroism in combat. Tony's citation read like something out of a war novel. The machine gun squad commander who stayed behind, who fought wounded and alone, who killed 11 enemy soldiers with his weapon, then beat 2 more to death with a shovel when his ammunition ran out, who inspired his comrades to counterattack and completely repulse the enemy. Extraordinary heroism? Absolutely. But was it the highest level of heroism? That was the question nobody asked in 1951. Tony's body was initially buried in Korea, in one of the United Nations military cemeteries that dotted the peninsula. Later, he was repatriated, brought home to Hawaii, to Maui. He was laid to rest in Makawao Veterans Cemetery, the island where he'd learned to swim, where he'd played basketball, where he'd grown up as the protective older brother in a family that defined itself by service. His family received the DSC, the Purple Heart, the other medals and citations. They grieved, they honored his memory, and for nearly 50 years, that seemed to be the end of Tony's story, except it wasn't. Late 1990s, Abel Kaho'ohanohano Sr., Tony's older brother, is looking through old military records, reading the official citations, reading witness statements from the battle, reading what Tony actually did that night. And Abel asks a question that should have been asked in 1951. Why wasn't this the Medal of Honor? Look at the criteria. The Medal of Honor is awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Above and beyond. Tony stayed behind, alone, above and beyond. He fought wounded for 2 hours, above and beyond. He killed 13 enemy soldiers and held his position until death. If that's not above and beyond, what is? Abel begins a campaign. He contacts politicians, military officials, and veteran organizations. He's not loud about it. The Kaho'ohanohano family doesn't do things for attention, but he's persistent, determined. His little brother's sacrifice deserved proper recognition. Then Abel dies, but the cause doesn't die with him. His son, Tony's nephew, George Kaho'ohanohano, picks up where his father left off. George was only 18 months old when Tony was killed. He never knew his uncle except through stories. His parents used to tell him that Tony called him Bambi. "I knew it couldn't be for my size," George said later. "He's not a small man." But my mom said, "No, you always used to look up at him with these big brown eyes, just like Bambi." That story stuck with George, the uncle who'd called him Bambi, the uncle who died on a Korean hillside before George could form memories, the uncle whose sacrifice seemed too extraordinary to be recognized with anything less than America's highest honor. George took up the fight. Representative Patsy Mink from Hawaii nominates Tony for the Medal of Honor. She submits the paperwork, the witness statements, the citation upgrades. She makes the case that this was an oversight, that the Distinguished Service Cross, while honorable, didn't fully capture what Tony had done. The Army reviews the nomination, and the Army says no, not enough. Evidence! Standards for Medal of Honor are extremely high. The DSC was appropriate. Recommendation denied. George doesn't give up. He contacts Senator Daniel Akaka, also from Hawaii. Akaka is a World War II veteran himself, understands military culture, and understands the politics of military decorations. More importantly, he understands that sometimes injustices need to be corrected, even 50 years later. Senator Akaka makes Tony's case his personal mission. He resubmits the nomination. He gathers additional documentation. He talks to military historians, to Korean War veterans, to anyone who can shed light on what happened at Hill, 851, March 2009. Army Secretary Pete Guerin reviews the case personally. He reads the witness statements, the action reports, the original DSC citation. He considers the criteria for the Medal of Honor, and he makes a decision that should have been made in 1951. This was Medal of Honor level heroism. Guerin approves the upgrade after careful, personal consideration. But there's a problem. Federal law has time limits on military decorations. You can't just award a Medal of Honor 60 years after the fact without congressional authorization. So Akaka adds a provision to the National Defense Authorization Act for 2010, essentially a bill that funds the military. Buried in hundreds of pages of defense spending is a single provision, authorization for the Army to posthumously award the Medal of Honor to Private First Class Anthony T. Kaho'ohanohano, October 28, 2009. President Barack Obama signs the National Defense Authorization Act into law. Tony is officially a Medal of Honor recipient. It only took 58 years. May 2nd, 2011, the White House, East Room. This is one of the most surreal days in American history. That morning, President Obama had announced that Navy SEALs had killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. The nation is still processing that news, celebration, relief, closure for 9/11 families. And in the middle of this historic moment, the Medal of Honor ceremony proceeds as scheduled because some things are more important than timing. Some debts must be paid, regardless of what else is happening in the world. Nearly 30 members of the Kaho'ohanohano family travel from Hawaii to Washington, D.C. Sister Elaine is there. Brother Eugene is there. Nephew George is there with his wife Barbara and his mother Madeline. The family that defines itself by service, gathering to witness their family member receive the recognition he earned 6 decades earlier. President Obama takes the podium. He's clearly exhausted. It's been less than 24 hours since the bin Laden operation, but his words are personal, thoughtful, genuine. Tony grew up in Hawaii, in Maui, Obama says. He learned early that we have a duty to others, from his father, a dedicated police officer, and his mother, who devoted herself to their 9 children. Obama smiles. He loved swimming in the ocean and playing basketball. Sounds like my kind of guy. The room laughs. It's a moment of lightness in a heavy ceremony. Then Obama's tone shifts, becomes serious, becomes reverent. By September 1951, the Korean War had been raging for more than a year, and Tony was part of the 17th Infantry Regiment, 7th Infantry Division, which had been fighting for strategic hills that could shape the course of the war. His squad was near a village called Chupari when they came under a ferocious attack. With the enemy advancing with his men outnumbered, Tony made a decision. He ordered his squad to fall back and seek cover. And then Tony did something else. He stayed behind. The room is absolutely silent now. Machine gun in hand, he laid down fire so his men could get to safety. He was one American soldier, alone, against an approaching army. When Tony was wounded in the shoulder, he fought on. He threw grenade after grenade. When his weapon ran out of ammunition, he grabbed another. And when he ran out of ammo, he reached for the only thing left, a shovel. Obama pauses. Let that image sink in. After firing so many bullets, the barrel of his machine gun was literally bent. But Tony had stood his ground. He had saved the lives of his men. George Kaho'ohanohano steps forward to accept the Medal of Honor on behalf of his uncle, the medal that should have been awarded in 1951, the medal that took a family's 50-year fight to achieve, the medal that finally properly recognized what happened on Hill 851. The president drapes the sky-blue ribbon around George's neck. The medal, a 5-pointed star hanging from the ribbon with the word Valor emblazoned across it, rests against George's chest. For Tony, for Bambi's uncle, for the man who chose a shovel over surrender. But here's what the president didn't mention that day, the full story of what that shovel represented. Not just Tony's story, but the story of every soldier who's ever faced the moment when the ammunition runs out and the enemy keeps coming. The story of the weapon of last resort, the tool that's been saving lives and taking lives since humans first went to war. The story of the entrenching tool and why it matters more than you think. The entrenching tool is older than gunpowder. Roman legions, the most effective military force in the ancient world, carried a tool called the dolabra, part pickaxe, part shovel, all weapons. Julius Caesar himself wrote about the importance of digging implements in warfare. After long marches, Roman soldiers would dig ditches and ramparts around their camps every single night. The dolabra wasn't just for digging, it was for killing, because the Romans understood something that every soldier who's ever lived has learned. When the sword breaks, when the spear snaps, when you've got nothing left, you fight with whatever's in your hands. Fast forward to World War I, the trenches of France and Belgium. Soldiers discovered that rifles with fixed bayonets were too long for trench fighting. You couldn't maneuver in those narrow, muddy corridors, so they sharpened their entrenching tools. Both edges made them into medieval weapons for modern war. There's a scene in Nancy Mitford's 1945 novel The Pursuit of Love, where she describes an entrenching tool hanging over a chimney. It belonged to Uncle Matthew, who in 1915 whacked to death 8 Germans one by one as they crawled out of a dugout. It is still covered with blood and hairs, an object of fascination to us as children. That was fiction based on fact. Soldiers on both sides routinely sharpened their shovels. The French called them coupe-coupe. The Germans called them klapspaten. The British just called them lifesavers. World War II, Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943. The most brutal urban combat in human history. German and Soviet forces fighting room to room, floor to floor, sometimes within the same building. Rifles were too unwieldy. Ammunition ran out. Men fought with entrenching tools in the ruins of apartment buildings and factories. The shovel became the weapon of last resort, the weapon that meant you'd exhausted every other option and refused to surrender. And it's appeared in Medal of Honor. Citations more times than you'd think. Let me introduce you to some of Tony's brothers in arms. Men who faced the same impossible choice and made the same impossible decision. Private First Class Herbert K. Pili Lau. Korean War, September 17, 1951. Just 16 days after Tony died. Pili Lau was also from Hawaii, also 21 years old. His unit was withdrawing under heavy enemy assault near Piari. Pili Lau volunteered to cover the withdrawal. Sound familiar? He fought alone for an hour, fired his rifle until it was empty, threw grenades until they were gone, fixed his bayonet, and engaged in hand-to-hand combat. When the bayonet broke, he grabbed his entrenching tool. When friendly forces counterattacked and retook the position, they found Pili Lau's body surrounded by 40 dead enemy soldiers. 40! 2 were killed with the entrenching tool. Medal of Honor, Posthumous, Private First Class Melvin L. Brown. Korean War, September 4, 1950. Brown was part of a unit defending a position near Kasan, Korea, when they were attacked by overwhelming North Korean forces. The situation was desperate. Enemy soldiers were climbing a 50-foot wall to breach the defensive perimeter. Brown positioned himself atop that wall. When his ammunition ran out, he drew his entrenching tool and waited. Every time an enemy soldier's head appeared over the wall, because you have to climb with your hands, can't defend yourself, Brown delivered what the citation calls a crushing blow upon the head. 10 to 12 enemy soldiers, one by one, like the world's most lethal game of whack-a-mole. His action was so inspiring that his platoon rallied and held the position. Medal of Honor, he survived. One of the lucky ones, Private First Class Louis Grover. Vietnam War, 1969. Grover was refilling canteens at a river in Quang Nam Province when he spotted a Viet Cong fighter in a nearby bunker. Grover was unarmed. He'd left his rifle at the unit position. But there was an entrenching tool on the riverbank. Grover pretended not to see the enemy fighter, casually picked up the E-tool, then attacked the bunker using only the shovel, and eliminated the threat before the VC could alert other enemy forces. He didn't get the Medal of Honor for that one, just a Silver Star, but the principle was the same. When you've got no gun, you've got a shovel. And if you've got a shovel, you've got a weapon. Want one more? This one's different, but illustrates the same mindset. Sergeant Harold Messerschmitt, World War II, France, 1944. Messerschmitt was supporting his unit in combat when he was hit by automatic weapons fire. Wounded badly, his submachine gun ran out of ammunition. He couldn't reload. Too badly wounded, losing too much blood. But enemy soldiers were advancing on his position. So Messerschmitt grabbed his empty submachine gun like a club and started swinging, beating enemy soldiers with a useless weapon because it was all he had left. He fought until he died. His last moments were spent clubbing Germans with an empty gun. Medal of Honor, Posthumous. Do you see the pattern here? These men, Tony, Herbert, Melvin, Louis, Harold, and dozens more whose names we don't have time to mention, they all reached the same point, the point where conventional warfare ended and something more primal began. Bullets gone? Use grenades. Grenades gone? Use the shovel. Shovel broken? Use your fists. Fists broken? Use your teeth. It's not about the shovel. It's about the refusal to quit, the absolute bone-deep, soul-level commitment to the mission, to your brothers, to the principle that surrender is not an option. The entrenching tool is just a symbol. It represents the moment when you've exhausted every advantage, every tool, every option. And you keep fighting anyway. That's why it matters. That's why Tony's shovel matters. Let me show you Tony's complete service record, because it tells a story beyond Hill 851, Medal of Honor, the highest Purple Heart for wounds received in action, Combat Infantryman Badge, awarded only to infantry soldiers who've engaged in active ground combat, Korean Service Medal with 1 Bronze Service Star, United Nations Service Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Republic of Korea Presidential Unit Citation, Republic of Korea War Service Medal, the Republic of Korea's Hwarang Distinguished Military Service Medal with Silver Star, awarded posthumously. That last one is important. The South Korean government, the nation Tony died defending, gave him their equivalent of a Medal of Honor because they understood what he'd done, what he'd sacrificed for their country, for people he'd never met, for a peninsula most Americans couldn't find on a map. Let's talk about what sacrifice actually means. Tony Kaho'ohanohano was 21 years old when he died. 21. Some of you watching this are older than that. Some of you are younger. Think about where you were at 21, what you cared about, what you thought was important. Tony was fighting on a frozen hillside in Korea, bleeding from a shoulder wound, killing enemy soldiers with a shovel. He never saw Hawaii become a state. That happened in 1959, 8 years after he died. He fought for a country that hadn't fully claimed his homeland, that treated Hawaii as a territory, a possession, not a full partner in the Union. But he served anyway. His father served. All 6 of his brothers served. That's 7 men from one family, putting on the uniform, taking the oath, accepting the possibility of death. Why? Because service wasn't about politics or territory or official recognition. It was about duty, about protecting others, about standing between the people you love and the people who want to hurt them. That's a sacrifice. Not the dying part. Any fool can die. The choosing part, the conscious decision to put others first, to accept risk, to do the hard thing when easier options exist. September 1951. 61 Americans were killed in action. Near Chupari in just 2 days. 61 families receiving telegrams, holding funerals, trying to make sense of loss. The Korean War is called the Forgotten War for a reason. It sits between World War II, the Good War, the war with clear villains and heroic narratives, and Vietnam, the controversial war that divided the nation. Korea gets lost in that gap. World War II gets movies and documentaries and endless books. Vietnam gets introspection and analysis and cultural examination. Korea gets forgotten, but men like Tony fought just as hard, bled just as red, died just as finely. There was nothing forgotten about their sacrifice when they were making it, when Tony was alone on Hill 851, when Herbert Pilalau was facing 40 enemy soldiers, when Melvin Brown was atop that wall. In those moments, their wars were real, immediate, absolute. We forget. They never forgot because they didn't survive to remember. The Kaho'ohanohano family legacy is almost unbelievable. 6 brothers, all served in the military, 1 Marine, 1 National Guard, 4 Army. That's a 100% service rate. Every son in that family put on a uniform. Later, Tony's nephew served in Afghanistan. 60 years after Tony died in Korea, another Kaho'ohanohano was in combat. Service defines this family. It's not just what they do, it's who they are. George Kaho'ohanohano, the nephew who fought for Tony's Medal of Honor, who spent years advocating for his uncle's recognition, he was 18 months old when Tony died, too young to remember. Everything he knows about his uncle comes from stories. His favorite story is about the nickname. Tony used to call baby George Bambi. "I knew it couldn't be for my size," George said. "He's a big man, but my mom told me, no, you always used to look up at him with these big brown eyes, just like Bambi." That story has always stuck with me. Think about that. George spent decades fighting for a man he never knew, based on stories and photographs and a childhood nickname he was too young to remember. That's legacy. That's family. That's love that transcends death. Let's go back to Hill 851, September 1st, 1951, 3 a.m. Tony Kaho'ohanohano faced a series of choices. First choice, when the enemy attacked and his company was ordered to withdraw, Tony could have withdrawn with his squad. That's what orders said. That's what tactics dictated. He would have survived. He stayed. Second choice, when he was wounded in the shoulder, bleeding, in pain, Tony could have retreated to the secondary defensive line, get medical treatment, live to fight another day. No one would have blamed him. He would have survived. He stayed. Third choice, when his ammunition ran out, when his grenades were gone, when enemy soldiers were closing in, Tony could have surrendered. Korean War POWs had survival rates. Not great, but better than fighting alone with a shovel. He would have survived. He fought. Why? Why make the choices that led to death when survival was possible? Because his squad needed time, because Company F needed time, because American soldiers were withdrawing under fire, vulnerable, and someone had to stop the enemy advance long enough for them to reach safety. Tony decided his life was worth trading for theirs, not that his life was worthless, that their lives were worth his life. There's a difference. It's the difference between giving up and giving everything. Here's the real victory at Hill 851. Tony's squad survived. Every man who fell back to secondary positions, the men Tony ordered to withdraw, they lived. They made it through September 1st. Some of them made it through the entire war. They survived because Tony didn't. They counterattacked because Tony inspired them, because they heard one machine gun firing for 2 hours, heard grenades exploding, and heard one man refusing to quit. And they decided that if Tony could fight alone, they could fight together. The North Korean assault was completely repulsed. The defensive line held. The sector remained in American hands. Strategic Hill 851 remained under UN control, all because one Hawaiian soldier with a shovel bought enough time for his brothers to regroup. Tony's death wasn't meaningless. It wasn't random. It wasn't a waste. It was for a purpose, pure purpose, the kind of purpose most of us will never be called upon to demonstrate. Makawao Veterans Cemetery, Maui, Hawaii, section where Tony is buried. His headstone is simple, regulation military marker. It lists his rank, Private First Class. His name, Anthony T. Kaho'ohanohano. His dates, July 22nd, 1930 to September 1st, 1951. It lists his decorations, Medal of Honor, Purple Heart, the others. It doesn't mention the shovel, doesn't mention the bent machine gun barrel, doesn't mention the 13 dead enemy soldiers, doesn't mention the 2-hour stand, doesn't mention that he fought wounded and alone. Some things don't fit on headstones, but they fit in memory, in history, in the stories we tell about what humans are capable of when everything is on the line. So let me ask you something. What would you fight for with a shovel? Not theoretically, not hypothetically, really. If every advantage was stripped away, if every option disappeared, if it came down to you and a 2-pound piece of sharpened steel, what would you fight for? What would you die alone for at 21 years old? Tony Kaho'ohanohano answered those questions on September 1st, 1951. His answer was everything, his squad, his company, his brothers, his duty, his honor, his refusal to let evil pass without opposition. Everything, that's the legacy, not the Medal of Honor, though that matters, not the ceremony at the White House, though that was overdue, not even the heroic last stand, though that inspires. The legacy is the answer to the question, what matters enough to die for? For Tony, the answer was clear. The men beside him, the men behind him, the men who depended on him. Everything else, his youth, his future, his dreams of returning to Maui, swimming in that ocean, playing basketball, seeing his family again, all of it became secondary the moment his brothers needed time to survive. And he gave them that time, with bullets, with grenades, with a shovel. with everything. If you learned something today, if Tony's story moved you, inspired you, made you think differently about sacrifice, hit that like button. It helps more people discover these forgotten heroes. Drop a comment below. What World War II or Korean War battle fascinates you most? What other stories should we cover? I read every comment and subscribe to this channel because there are hundreds of stories like Tony's, stories of incredible sacrifice, courage beyond measure, actions that deserve to be remembered. Next time, we're covering the soldier who captured an entire German company with an empty rifle. No bullets, just audacity. You won't believe how he did it. But that's next. Time. Today, remember Private First Class Anthony T. Kaho'ohanohano. Remember Hill 851. Remember that a shovel isn't just a tool for digging. Sometimes it's the weapon of last resort. Sometimes it's the difference between life and death. Sometimes it's how you save your brothers when you've got nothing else left. Remember Tony, remember the shovel, remember what it means to give everything.